Okay, so what we're looking at now, when we're now at lecture number, I forgot now, 5 or 6, something like that in our series, is HR management, so human resource management. So we're looking at the function of the HR department, bearing in mind that in practice, as well as in theory, your most valuable asset is your people. Certainly if you're in a people business, PricewaterhouseCoopers, accounting firms, law firms and things like that, the object of the exercise is to get the right people into the right places, doing the right things, and to get those people motivated so that they are working as hard as they possibly can. That will develop them as people and that will grow as your business, and you want them to be happy. You'll know from your earlier studies that there are costs attached to high staff turnover, there are training costs, and when people are unhappy and they're not working as well as they can, it not only creates a bad atmosphere, but there is obviously an actual downside in terms of profits because you're paying people to underperform. I think the format that we've got then is HR management will be split into two. Once again, I just looked at the slides. I think they're almost exactly 30 slides. So we'll do the theory first, which will be this class. Once again, we're going to be coming back to this idea of structure. So you need to watch the theory. The theory will give you some ideas. Once you've got your ideas, then you use those ideas, and that gives you the format of your exam. So let's crack on then with HR management, a topic which in real life and in the exam very likely to come up in the exam. So you must know this stuff. And again, structure. You've got to know the theory because the theory gives you the structure to your answer, which you can then apply. And that application takes you from a fail to a pass. Okay, best of luck. Okay, so our first theory is, remember our topic is HR management, so we're looking at the HR function here, and we're not just looking at the HR function and how the human resources department works, but we're looking here, particularly with this guy Hopwood, we're looking at how managers are managed. So we have the situation where you are a manager in an organization, and Hopwood is saying there are 3 different ways in which you as an individual can be managed by your superiors and by the organization. If you look at the slides, you'll see that there's only 2 here. Because of the size of the writing, I've cut and pasted the 3rd one onto the next slide. So number 3 is on the next slide. So 3 different ways in which managers are evaluated. Right, the first one here, it's called, and Hopwood has called it budget constrained. Right, you have to try and learn this for the exam. Remember, structure. So we're talking about how our managers, there'll be something in the question, how our managers potentially managed. You will list your 3, which are budget, profit, and other. And then within that, you'll have your points saying what they are, and then you'll expand it. So number 1 is budget. Right, the whole point about budget is that managers are judged on their abilities to meet budgets. The advantage of that, therefore, is that if your budget is well structured and a manager can meet it, then there will be profits for the organization. The downside of it is that the guy is focused on one thing and one thing only, and that one thing is meeting the budget. So therefore you may get some sort of strange decisions being made or poor decisions being made because of what the driver is. So if you just look at the slide there, it says manager may be criticised for poor results. Well, he certainly could be if it doesn't meet the budget. Behavioural aspect, short-term decision making will certainly happen. It may result in poor working relations with colleagues. It can do. Certainly I've seen managers work very hard to persuade staff not to charge overtime for the budget. And it can result in manipulation of data. That can happen as well. What happens with these things, let's assume you're a manager on 4 or 5 jobs, as you would be in, say, a law firm. If you have one job that's coming in at significantly under budget, you can start transferring time from other jobs onto it. The big problem of that is that the people who are setting the budgets then look at this and they go, oh look, Mike's got 5 jobs and he's meeting budget on all of them. What they don't understand is that we're moving costs from one budget to another to achieve that. And it means therefore that when they're negotiating prices with the clients, when they're talking to the clients, they're not really understanding what the actual cost of the job is. And so you get problems there, which can be long-term structural problems, that you're accepting clients as fees that's significantly lower than the fee you need to break even or to turn a decent profit. Yeah. So budget. People being judged by the budget. The good things are if you meet the budget, it's got to be good for the company. The bad side of it is that it can lead to short-termism and it can lead to people playing around with the numbers to meet the budget. That was number one of Hopwood. Remember the guy's name is Hopwood. I think he was writing in the 60s from memory. Number two is profit. So it's the same kind of idea, but you have to make a profit, so you're evaluated on profit. It's very, very similar, in my opinion, to the budget. The one difference with it is that you may have the opportunity to go over budget if you can pass those additional costs on. So the fee would not be a fixed fee. You might see this in areas where you had cost plus pricing, and so the cost, or if you've got a client where you can go out and sell extra work to them. So you start with a budget for a piece of work, but you can tack extra budgets onto it because you can make additional work. So the other thing, if you look at tax, for example, where I saw this stuff, you did your routine tax work. So your routine tax work was prepare your annual tax return, be it for an individual or a company. If there was an investigation, or if you could persuade them that they should do some extra work, transfer pricing inquiry, for example, that extra work usually had much higher premiums attached to it. So therefore, you could, by pushing this extra work, you'll find you're going over budget, but you can pass the cost on, and the profit actually increases. It gives the managers a bit more autonomy. Right, Hopwood, first one was budget, second one is profit. The advantages of it are that we can look at other ways and other products that we can sell, and so the whole thing becomes a bigger picture. You're not just tied to the budget. Going over budget is okay if you can pass the costs on. The downside of it is it's the same. It's still going to be a profit. Partners look at their profit share over 1 year, and so you're still making short-term decisions. And once again, there isn't any really great idea that you're going to invest in the project. So it's still a very narrow picture. Okay, that's Hopwood. Those are the first two, and I now have to work out how I'm going to get this picture onto that slide. So slide number 3 is Hopwood's third style. We saw budget, we saw profits, and now what we see with Hopwood in number 3 therefore is some other measure or some other combination of measures. Seems to me that this is probably considered to be the best one, and most of you out there are having your staff reviews will have, certainly if you're in accountancy practices, law practices, your ability to generate billable hours and fees is obviously very, very important, but there will also be other sides to your work, your technical knowledge, your management of staff, and so on and so forth. Obviously as well, if you're working in customer service or something like that, then things like customer service will be important. So Hopwood has this third style which is not based around numbers purely. I have to say that Hopwood is a nice little thing. It gives you a nice little structure for an exam, but it seems to me it's really, really quite sort of dated and out of fashion. I think we can do better than this, you know, in the 21st century, but that's Hopwood as well. The object of the exercise, as far as you're concerned, is to come up with something which gives your answer a structure. Hopwood is a nice little structure if you get this in the answer. I'm sorry, if you get this in the exam. So you should know it, yeah, and it's really not very difficult. So slide number 4, importance of human resources. Right, once again, this is the kind of thing, you know, students look at this and they go, oh my god, this is so obvious. And it really is so obvious. And it is so obvious. The problem is that they then go into the exam and they forget about it. So please just remember these two things here. People are fundamental to the organisation. How many times have we heard, you know, our most valuable asset is our people? But they're on two different levels, the strategic significance and the operational significance. Operational significance is what can you do for me today? So we need you to manufacture some cans of beans, so manufacture some cans of beans. The strategic significance is taking the organisation to where it wants to be. So that idea of managing people and setting up new systems and new structures which move us to where we want to go. Right, the importance of human resources. I imagine most of you are looking at this going, bloody hell, why am I watching this video? What a complete waste of my time. The problem is that the pass rate at the last exam was 29%, so 71% of you are going to go in the exam and not write that. So please learn it, please remember it, please, please, please pass. Right, the recruitment process, what are we actually trying to do therefore? From the company's perspective, so the first two here, we're looking at the company's perspective, we are ensuring that this person has the right skills. Now don't forget that the recruitment process is a two-way process. I would say that 80% of people go to an interview because they really want the job, and so therefore they'll say or do anything. But it should always be in your arsenal that if this job is not correct for me, then I will reject it or turn it down. And I hope you've done that at some point in the past. I know I have gone to interviews and come away and gone, I just don't want to work there at all. Right, so that therefore it is for both people, but I think the slide doesn't really reflect that, but for both people, do I have the right skills and do I have the right attitude to fit in it? In some places where you go, you're going to be given considerable amount of leeway to develop the job into what you want it to be. In others, in bureaucracies like the United Nations, it's going to be incredibly rigid down to the letter, what you are required to do every day and the way in which you are required to behave. And that does require a certain sort of person. If you are not particularly good at being under the cosh all day, don't go there. Then don't go there. So in terms of the recruitment process, 3 things to remember. Remember structure, structure, structure. So does the person have the right skills for the job? Does the person have the right attitude and personality? Will they fit into the team that they are going into? And number 3, those questions should apply for the individual as well. Does the individual feel that this is somewhere where they will be happy and productive and they will develop? You know, certainly when I used to have my own business and I used to hire people, I used to say to people, I'm hiring you for a couple of years. At the end of 2 years, you'll be able to do this job with your eyes closed. So therefore, you need to look at where you need to go next. And we can have that as a conversation, that we help you, give you some experience to help you move to your next job. Or if we have a suitable position here, we'll try and move you into it. People should always be looking to grow. So therefore, and it should always be about them. You spend 60 hours a week minimum, either at work, traveling to work, thinking about work. And it's just, you know, for many people who I see, they only have 70 years on this planet, and going to work is really not a good use of their time, but they do it because society demands and because their wife needs shoes and their kids want horse riding lessons. You've got to get this right. Does that person have the right skills? Do they have the right attitude for your organisation? And from the individual's perspective, do those things exist as well? And that should be not just theory, that's real life. Right, the staff appraisal process is a process that has a tendency in many companies in real life either to be a little bit of a joke, you know, you're the only guy who can do this, so it doesn't really matter what we write, or that sort of ritual humiliation that comes straight out of the pages of Dilbert. The appraisal process should look in 2 different ways. It should look backwards to see what you've done and assess what you've done, and then it should look forward to see what it is going to happen in the future. The appraisal process should be a sort of open and transparent process where your manager can say to you what he feels and he thinks, and by the same token that you should be able to come back, and we should all leave it friends, happy that we've come on the piece of paper to a compromise position where we agree what's on that piece of paper. And probably for the organisation, most important, where there are weaknesses in the organisation or in the individual, those are highlighted, agreed, and they're going to be attacked, and we show what's going to come up next. So this is a really common exam question. What is the point of the appraisal process and how do we make it useful? So you have to know this stuff. Remember, structure. I have no doubt loads of you are sitting watching this, because this will get a couple of thousand views, and of those couple of thousand views, 1,500 people will go, oh my god, why am I watching this? Let's just leave this on while I go and get a cup of coffee. And then it will come up in the exam and people won't write the right stuff. So please learn it. Please, I beg you, learn this stuff. Right, the appraisal process that we're looking here from the company perspective, I suppose, is that there is control. It should be judgmental. So how well has that person performed? And it's impossible not to do this. How well has that person not performed compared to their peers? Are they better or are they worse than the people around them? So it is judgmental. In terms of the control, we're setting the strategic objectives. So what does this person need to do in terms of what the company wants them to do? The closer you are to the published strategy, the higher you will be in the organisation. But it will set some measurable targets. So notice that we're doing 2 things here with these 2 things. First of all, we're saying those were last year's targets. How did you perform against those targets? And secondly, we're setting some measurable targets for the forthcoming year. So what are we going to do in the forthcoming year? And finally, organisational performance. It may be your group has underperformed in terms of volume of units produced. It has overperformed in terms of profit. So what is the organisational performance that reflects on you? And usually this is more linked to bonuses. So just have a look at what we've got there. We've got judgmental. What did you do last year? Then we've got targets. how did you perform against your targets, and let's set some targets for next year. Okay, so you've got this idea of making a judgment, targets, and then you've got how did the organisation do overall. That is likely to affect you in the sense that your performance level will give you a certain chunk of some bonus pot, and the size of the bonus pot is linked to the profits of the organisation. Three things: judgmental, targets, and the organisation. And that's this idea of control. You are being controlled. The next thing is development, to assist you to do better next year and to meet your targets. What is it that you actually need? So there will be a training and development plan. Now, again, the size of this thing will depend on what the job is. If you are literally standing on a production line making cans of beans and you've been doing the same thing for 10 years, then other than saying thank you, there's probably not very much that's going to happen. If you are a second-year auditor and you're particularly good at one part of your job, believe it or not, when I was in tax department, the part of my job that everyone went, oh, Mark's the best at that, was teaching. I had my development plan was to do more and more and more training, and I ended up doing a couple of months of training a year within what in those days was Coopers and Iran. Difficult to believe when you listen to this, huh? Right, so you're going to set this training and development needs. What trainings do you need? If you're a second-year auditor, then you need training to take you to the next technical level in auditing, international auditing standards, IFRS, and maybe some other report writing, presentation skills. Development skills may also cover management as well. So you're going to get this staff review that shows you need very, very big. If your partner in charge of, CIS or something, then your development is much less. You probably want to go on some leadership training or something like that. Right, the appraisal process. Control. We are controlling the individual, but we have three things: the judgment of their past performance, targets, past and future, and organisational performance. And then development is what do we go forward to assist that person to attack their weaknesses and go to the next level of their career. I think theoretically the development is the most important. In real life, control will be more important. Right, I think you just have to open Google to see the things that can go wrong in the staff appraisal process. But I've given you a list here. Try and learn as many of these things as you can, because once again, it's this idea of giving you structure in the exam. It's come up time and time again, what can go wrong in the appraisal process and how do we make it better. So try and come up with some mnemonic or some way in which you can learn this. Don't looking in a mirror, your hair goes up on one side, but your automatic reaction is to touch the other side. Right, the first thing is confrontation. I mean, this is very, very true, and I think that we've all been in staff appraisals where we just simply haven't agreed as the person either giving the appraisal or the person receiving the appraisal. And certainly at one stage of my career, I was in charge of, I had 3 assistants, and 2 of them were absolutely fantastic, and 1 of them was useless. She used to come in late, take 2-hour lunches, and whatever she did in between was pretty useless. And yet, when I went to the staff appraisal, we literally reached a point when I had to ask someone else to come in and do a second appraisal of her, because she just did not accept that she was not A-grade staff. And it was difficult for her because the other 2, I was always fairly generous. I gave outstandings to. She got an average needs improvement, and she didn't like that either. She was way, way back from the other 2. When you get confrontation like that, just ask someone else who's got experience to come in and back you up, or to tell you that you're wrong. I've had other staff appraisals where it's been the other way around. I worked in one organisation where the first 2 years I was told I got outstanding, this guy's a star, he's ready for promotion already. And then a third person came in, and she wanted to show that everything that had happened before she arrived was absolutely terrible, and she had made this fantastic change to the organisation. And so she gave myself and everyone else in the team not acceptables, because she wanted to get rid of us, bring her own people in, and blah blah blah. And at that point, the whole department just went to the person 2 grades above her and said, "This isn't right. It's not possible that all 5 of us are really bad." So you can get confrontations. You have to avoid the confrontations, and if it is starting to get confrontational, then you need to bring other people in, because that will very, very adversely affect the work of the department in the future. The second one is it's judgmental. I think we've all worked in departments where you have one manager who gives everyone the best you can ever get is average, and then the guy next to him just gives everyone outstandings. you just have to deal with that, and I would hope that your HR department has some system of grading these things. You get the same in exam marking. You'll get one exam marker who gives everybody 90%, and the next guy who gives everybody 20%, and then there is a system of normalization of the marks. So you hope that that's going to happen. And therefore, again, in this situation, if that's happening, the organisation should be aware. And the organisation can see it. If one manager has 6 members of staff and they all get outstandings, there's something wrong with that as well, unless they've won a massive, $20 million project or something, and they all deserve bonuses. So judgmental, and we hit judgmental by just normalising the schools, so that across a group of managers. Right, a chat, this certainly happens as well. It becomes a chat. How'd you do? It was fine. Yeah, it was great, wasn't it? Do you remember when so-and-so did this? The problem with the chat is that it doesn't help anyone. If you've got a team, the tasks are fixed and the team's settled and you've been there for 5 years, then I guess you just wonder why you're even bothering to waste time on it. Just turn it into a social event. But if it is a chat and you're in an organisation where people do have issues and do need to develop, you need to kill that off, and it needs to be a formal process. The easiest way to do it is to link people's salary to their staff review levels, because if you do that, then the individual will take that element of fun out of it. Bureaucracy, yes, I've certainly seen this. Is that the organisation has 10,000 employees and it introduces this system, and there's boxes to tick, and what I've certainly seen is that the staff council also get involved, and then they take out most of the elements of sort of judgment and stuff. If it becomes a huge bureaucracy and the cost is greater than the benefits, then you have to address that with HR. That can be very, very difficult. Or you just have to cut through the bureaucracy and focus on the meaningful. But that happens in many, many large organisations. They have a commitment to developing their staff, but one size does not fit all. Yeah. It becomes an event. Yes, we've certainly seen that. I mean, that's kind of like the chat thing, where it does become a social event. And what is relevant for chat is relevant for an event, because you're not there. You're not there for the staff review. You're there for the bowling and the booze sort of thing. Then it needs to be pulled back in line and made a serious process, and nothing done. That is so common, isn't it? We come down there, you need all of these training courses, but there's nothing in the budget for training courses. You need to get some management, but we can't give you a couple of people to report to you without a couple of other people getting it. There aren't enough people to go around, and and 1 year later you're just sat. And some of these things you can actually just copy them forward, so they just stay exactly the same. If nothing's getting done, then it's a waste of time, and you need to review the process and make it more meaningful, find out why nothing's getting done. Okay, difficulties in appraisals. I don't have an actual model to give you there, so you're going to have to learn some kind of a list. I've given you a list if you can be bothered to learn that. Comes up in the exam all the time, and it is so badly done as well, because people start going off, and you get people who've had bad staff. I've seen this in mock exams. People who've had bad staff appraisals, and they splurge all of their anger onto the page in front of you, and you go, well, that was very good, but that's only 1 point from 6, so I can only give you 2 of the 12 marks for this. Make sure you can express your thoughts. Headings. Yeah, go for it. Okay, so what we're looking at in slide number 8, therefore, is the setting of targets. So this is when remember, we're in the staff appraisal process, and we've got this idea, therefore, that the individual, so the employee, is agreeing with his manager or with his superiors that they will set some targets. So there are 4 things, and maybe not really clear from the way that slide's set out. Is it green and white? But this is a list of 4 different things. So your targets must be relevant, so they must be relevant to the job that the person is doing, relevant to the organisation. They should match the strategy, etc., etc. So therefore, you understand what relevant means. They should be achievable. We all know that you should set targets which are not too easy, but not too difficult. So therefore, if the person puts in a reasonable amount of effort, they should be able to achieve their targets. The targets that they're aiming for should be under their control. You don't want this, well, I didn't do it, but I didn't do it because that department didn't provide me with enough stuff from the warehouse or whatever. So they should be controllable. And finally, they should be prioritized. There's nothing worse than going into a staff review or certainly for me as a consultant reviewing a contract, you're saying, okay, these were what we were set as the goals and aims, and this is what we did, these were the targets, and then somebody turned around saying, oh yeah, but what about this over here? And you're going, well, you never told me at the start that that was important, so why is it suddenly important now? So they should be prioritised. I don't think that there's anything difficult there. Structure, structure, structure. Try and remember them. So RACP. You'll remember that now. You know that? RACP. Right. Try and get those down in the exam. So we're still looking at this appraisal process and this process of judging individuals who are our employees. So in slide number 9, we now have the measurement of performance. So how do we actually measure an individual's performance? Well, you can see here there are 3 different approaches that we can take. Number 1 is to judge them by the amount of input that they have had. So what have you actually used to achieve an outcome? So let's assume that a machine is set up to produce 100,000 cans of beans. That is a fixed factor. So you would therefore judge the manager on the amount of inputs that he's used. So how much metal, how much whatever else, how much labour, how many beans, how much tomato sauce, and so on have you actually used to achieve that. So we're judging the guy on the level of his input. This will be most relevant in situations where the output is relatively fixed. And you can talk about an audit as well. We know that we're going to give these guys an audit, and we know 99% certain it's going to be unqualified and the accounts are not going to look materially different from the starting point when the client first gave us their draft accounts. So what have we used to input? How many people have we used? And what other kind of expenses have we got? Very little material cost in an audit. Yeah? So you've got your input. Right, the second one, which I would look at, is your results and outcomes. So this is where your result is not fixed. So this would be where you have a football manager. So a football manager, how are you judged therefore, or how have you performed in terms of your football team? Where have you finished in the league? How many games have you won? What cups? Or in my football team, how many times have you avoided being thrashed off the park week in, week out? So now, in this sense, the results, the inputs are relatively fixed. Now a football manager has inputs in terms of the sense of a certain sum of money. He can spend that sum of money on players' wages, so this guy's expensive, this guy's cheap, this guy's young, this guy's very good but old or whatever, and he makes those decisions. He's ultimately judged almost, not always, but almost solely on the results that come out at the end. So how is this football team playing and what do the fans think of it? So you've got those two opposites. The bearing, now most people will be judged on a number of measures, so there'll be a number of measures if you're working in an audit department, which will spread across these things. But your key ones will be dictated by the nature of the business. If you know you're going to do an audit, then it's in your inputs. If you know what your budget is, but it's how you spend that budget across various categories, then it will be results based. The one in the middle is behaviour. So behaviour for your manager will be judged if particularly it's important that you have a team. Let's assume that you are something like an air stewardess. So one of these ladies who works on an aeroplane handing out tea, coffee, and obviously I can feel the hatred already. And in the situation as well where if the plane crashes, they look after you and they administer first aid and all those other stuff that we hope we never get to see. There it's going to be much more linked to your behaviour. So you're a public figure, you're in one of those jobs where you wear a uniform that gives you some form of authority. So what is your behaviour? Do you respond well to customer requests? Those annoying people who bing, 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 hit the buttons all day everywhere. Yeah, because your inputs are your personality. Your results are that we get people alive from one end of the world to the other. So it's your behaviour. So again, the most important of these measures will be driven by the nature of the business. But you should remember all three: inputs, outputs, and behaviour. So we've looked now at various topics, which is what is the point of the appraisal process? How do we make the appraisal process useful? Right, focus on the exam now, because you're just seeing through all this stuff. But focus on the exam. What's going to happen to you is that you're going to be given various scenarios where there are problems with the staff appraisal process. For those of you who've been following these lectures through, you've already seen an example of that. So you saw where in the last topics where the MD was concerned about the appraisal process and you were expected to use these theories. And you'll forgive me for giving you a question on a topic that you hadn't studied, but now you can go back and do it again. So So we've looked at the setting of targets, we've looked at how we judge people, we've looked at what a good appraisal process should do. The next few slides now are on theories from psychologists, and those theories are based around how we actually motivate people. So we're going to look at Abraham Maslow, and now we're going to look at Victor Vroom. So the first one is Victor Vroom, and that's just the best name ever, isn't it? I really can't believe that actually is his real name. So Victor Vroom said that force, which is basically what we're looking for, force is how people will actually react, how motivated they are, is equal to valence times expectancy. And Victor imagines that in some way we can put values on these things. Right, obviously all of these guys in universities want to make their theories sound exciting. So we get this idea of valence. Valence is your strength of desire or your personal will or motivation, and then multiplied by expectancy, which is your probability of achieving. Right, so therefore with valence, the object of the exercise here is we bring in these words like goal congruence. We want to make the individual want to achieve their targets very, very much. And so we do that, therefore, with goal congruence. The targets we set the individual are what the individual wants to do themselves. Yeah. So therefore, I particularly was in tax department, enjoyed teaching. So what we do is that we allow that individual, me in this case, to do as much teaching as possible. Reduce the actual practical tax work, the filling in of tax returns in the computer system, and replace that with doing technical tax training, which I was good at. And again, these things become the cyclical. You know, I was considered to be good at it, so I enjoyed it. Maybe, and who knows? Either I enjoyed it, that made me good at it, or I was good at it because of that I enjoyed it. Who knows what comes first, the chicken or the egg in the tax department? But the strength of desire was there. I was particularly motivated to do these tax training courses, and people were motivated to come to them as well. Right, that is also a function of expectancy, so the probability of achieving those aims. Now, Victor says that there seems to be a direct linear relationship. I'm not completely sure I agree with that. If you set targets which are too easy, I'm not sure that motivates people because they know they'll achieve them anyway. I had a friend who was working for a telecoms company in sales, and he had his year's target, and he just got lucky. He got a huge contract on the 10th of January, so he'd met his targets for the year in January. So I don't think he was particularly motivated from the 1st of February onwards. In fact, almost anything, he'd want to hold back sales so he can get them the year after to get a thumping great bonus again. Right, what I think doesn't matter. Victor tells us that force, which is your motivation, your willingness to work in a good way, is equal to two things. Valence, which is your strength of desire, and your expectancy multiplied by your probability of achieving. What's going to happen to you in the exam is you're going to be asked to comment on how do we motivate the workers to work as much and as well as possible. You're going to say, well, Victor Vroom says it's valence times expectancy. Try to remember those words, which is your strength of desire multiplied by your probability of achieving, and then you're going to have to lift something from the question for each of those things, one for valence and one for expectancy. Okay. So Abraham Maslow, he was writing in the 1920s and 1930s, as I remember. He said that there are 6 different levels. So this is what this thing is showing here. That there are these different levels at which people operate. Right? What does that mean? The basic level is that people will search for food and water. So that's what he's telling you. Right, now that sounds a strange thing to do, but in some countries where you have people like the United Nations operating, there was certainly one centre they had where there were people who lived in a shanty town who were working in the office. So at that kind of level, people are just thinking that their job is there to provide them with the basic sustenance that keeps them alive, oxygen, food, water, and so on. So what we're at the bottom of the pyramid. Now what Maslow is saying is that as you go through these things higher and higher, so as you achieve each level, you will move on to the next one, and that will be your driving force. So your first level is this idea that we need to get food and water. So in countries where there is basically no system of unemployment benefit or anything, people need the job to survive, to feed themselves. So therefore, at that level, people will behave in a certain way, and that is their driver. I imagine, therefore, that your key driver, if you are unfortunate enough to be in that situation, is you will do anything not to lose your job, because losing your job could mean potentially the limits of the theory are starvation. Right, once we get above this idea that we can feed ourselves with food, water, and so on, then we get to the point of safety. So the next thing is that human beings will look for physical safety. So again, I mean, you could imagine somewhere like the UN, where you're working in DRC, in Congo, or somewhere where working in the UN actually provides you with a certain level of physical safety as well. Now, most of the foreigners who work for the UN, certainly in the field missions, are going through the opposite process, where they're assuming risk in terms of physical risk. But those two levels, I think, certainly if you're sitting in most developing or developed countries, you don't have much of a concept. If you lose your job, you're not really in danger of starving to death or getting shot or something. So those things we would hope in the 21st century are a little bit of a given. Right, the next one is social. Human beings are by their very nature social animals. So what we're looking at now at this point is that we're looking at people who are driven by social needs. So therefore they have a need to be in an organisation or a situation where there are people around them. Now, I think we all know that we come across people who are people pleasers. I've certainly worked with people who've done work and then haven't billed it because they think that they'll make other people angry. Now, for me as an individual, I'm maybe just really not a very nice person, but if somebody comes to me and says, we'll pay you $20,000 to do this work, the concept of not billing it, simply not billing it, let alone not going through some process of not getting paid for it, it is beyond comprehension. But these people do exist, and I used to share a flat with a girl, and she was like this. The most important part of the job for her was the social element. She needed to be part of a team, and she needed to be liked as well. Right, remember with Maslow, what's happening therefore is we're starting off and saying we've got this certain basic physiological level, food, water. Once we pass through that, once we're happy that we are safe, able to feed ourselves, we will hit safety. Once we are happy with our safety, we will hit a social level. Now, Maslow said that some people, like me, for example, maybe won't find it that important, but there are other people who find it hugely important. So these levels can stretch as well. Right, once you're happy with your social level of your environment, so there are enough people around you, the next level you will hit is ego. So this is where people want to be told they're good at what they're doing. So we get this idea of ego. And as I said, just simply being told that you're good at what you are, having people around you who like you and respect you and so on. Once you are satisfied with your egotistical level, the final level you will move to is self-fulfillment. And this is individual for each individual. So people have their own individual needs, wants, desires, and so on. And they're all separate. You certainly see this as very successful career people. If they're very motivated by money, as they get to the top of their career, they will be driven to get more money. Other people with power, you see people like Boris Yeltsin, who never gave the impression of caring about money at all, but he just liked this idea of playing with people and moving them around. And so we all get these ideas, and you'll get people like Bill Gates who reach a certain point when they just give all of their money away to charity and so on. That is fulfilling a personal need that exists within them at that personal time. Right, remember what the theory says. These things are levels. So we start off with food and water. Once we are satisfied that we are able to get food and water, then we'll move to safety. Once we're satisfied we're safe, we'll move to social. And you move through these things layer by layer. How far you have to go through them will depend on the individual. Some individuals will require a lot of food, others not so much, and so on. How you're going to use it is that in the exam you'll be asked to comment on motivation for a group of people, and you need to say that within that group of people they will have different needs, and then you talk about Maslow as a theory and then you will apply it. Mr. X over here wants to be in the training department because he wants to be really good and he loves to get 5 on assessment forms. This guy over here can't imagine anything worse of all, but his personal fulfillment is money, so you will motivate him by paying him a bonus, and so it goes on. That's how you use it. Okay, once again, this is one of these fairly obvious topics, but it comes up in the exam time and time again, and it's so badly done. And I know you're watching this, but I can't stress to you enough that you actually take a little bit of time to learn this stuff. What is the purpose of the reward system? So the reward system is you go to work all day every day, and as as Mark Twain eloquently put it, if work was meant to be fun, they wouldn't have to pay you to go. So what is the purpose of the reward system? And many companies, large companies now have this sort of cafeteria approach where you get to choose some money and a car and extra days off holiday and some vouchers for your kids' education and stuff. But what is the purpose of it? Well, it serves three purposes. One is obviously recruitment and retention, so it's to attract people and keep them there. So companies will often set a thing, they call them an anchor in some companies. So we will be 75% of the market lead salary or whatever, and that's what they feel they need to do. The point of the reward system, and remember it's not just money we're normally talking about here, is to recruit and retain your members of staff. And usually, again, there are certain members of staff you really don't care if they leave, and other members of staff you really want to keep. So there will be some differential in there as well. So recruitment, retention, a fair and consistent basis of reward. Now, this is something that you see in some companies as well. Some people don't seem to do very much, but they get big chunky salaries and big chunky bonuses, whereas others work really, really hard and they don't. So the object of the exercise is for it to be fair and consistent. And number three is motivation, which is kind of self-explanatory. Once again, please try and learn these things. What are we doing? Structure, structure, structure. You're going to get a question on this. You're going to get a question as a consultant from the MD of the company. What is it we're really trying to do with the reward system? Because their automatic approach will be that the object of the exercise is to pay these people as little as possible and get them to work as hard as possible. That as an approach has its short-term merits, but it won't do you any good in the long term. And remember that high staff turnover is almost never ever good for a business. Okay, so focusing on the exam, what have we actually done there for? Remembering that the object of the exercise all the time is to get this kind of sense of some sort of system that you can hang things on. So in other words, which is going to give you a structure to your answer. We started by looking at management styles with Hopwood, so we had our three different management styles. Then we moved on through the recruitment process. What is the point of the recruitment process? Then we looked at staff appraisals. What are we doing with staff appraisals? Then we looked at motivation. The final little topic we've got now is linking reward to performance. In the exam, it's come up time and time again. It's in almost every exam. The CEO is concerned about something in the HR process and they want to get more out of their staff. The final thing that's going to happen to you now is we've got linking reward to performance. So why do we link your performance to the amount of money you get? Right, the advantages are fairly obvious. The incentive, the harder the better you work, the more money you get. Goal congruence. We set people targets for the organisation. If they achieve them, we give them money. So the organisation makes more profit. We've got more money to give out. Attract and retain. People get this idea that they're good at their job, they work hard, so they get more money. It sends a signal. So the signal is that the more you work, the more you get. And the culture. So it builds a culture whereby people work hard and they get rewarded for that hard work. So those are the advantages. And I think the advantages are fairly simple. I've put 5 there. Remember, exam structure. You're going to have 1 point. It's an incentive. Why is it an incentive? Because people see that the harder they work, the more money that they get. Fairly obvious. Attract and retain. You want to go to an organisation where your efforts are rewarded, as long as you can agree what they are. And culture. I think the advantages are fairly straightforward. Disadvantages may be a bit less obvious. Okay, so why do we link reward to performance? Once again, I think slide number 13, I just chat for 2 minutes or something. It really is quite straightforward, and you should be able to come up with 3 or 4 points, which is what you will be required to do in the exam. The alternatives, if alternative is the right word, the disadvantages to this is that it can be really rather demoralizing for people. The first thing is that we misprioritize. So the performance, remembering now we're getting down into what the actual targets are. So therefore we misprioritize those targets. So you get a bonus which is related to the number of faults. Less faults, more money. Well, the problem with that is that people then will spend so long making sure that they don't get any faults that it becomes uneconomic. There is an acceptable level of wastage and faultage in your process. So we get this idea of misprioritizing. The performance target is not the correct performance target. Also, it's not controllable. So you can only work so well with what you get from the department before you. We used to get this in tax, that we would ask the audit department to get information for us. They, of course, didn't care, wouldn't bother. And then, of course, you were stuck having to go back around and spend all of your time chasing information. And that, of course, wasn't in the budget. So linking reward to performance, the areas where you need to be careful are making sure that the targets are correctly prioritized. And following on from the same thing, you will be demotivated if you don't agree with the criteria. So if you don't agree with those criteria, then your salary is linked to something that you don't think is appropriate. Number 3 is stress. My salary is linked. My salary will go up or down related to this. There certainly does become a culture of sharing knowledge about your bonus if you've got a good one, and lying about it if you didn't get a good one. So there can be an element of stress. The 4th one there is the basis of calculation. So how are these things actually calculated? If it's based on you as an individual, fair enough. But what if it's a team? You have one guy in the team who's always off sick, so nobody gets a bonus because of him. Is it related to the company, and so on and so forth? Right, I think with those things you need to put a little bit of thought into them. Right, this is yet another topic in paper P5 where you've sat through a long lecture and you haven't learned anything because you knew it all already. So why do people fail? Why does it have such a low pass rate? Because all the way through this, what I've tried to tell you and what you need to understand, what's going to happen to you in the exam and how do you structure it to get the right answer. Okay, and all the time that has to be what's in there. You're not learning technical knowledge, you know the technical stuff. It's how to apply it to the question, how to plan and how to create a structure. Okay, the next topic is part 2 of this, which is looking at exactly some specific exam questions.